Sana had learned long ago that silence was safety. In the 5 years she had worked in the kitchens of Winterhold Castle, she had spoken perhaps 100 words total. A whispered yes when given orders, a barely audible sorry when she made mistakes. Nothing more. The other servants had stopped trying to engage her in conversation. The head cook had given up asking her questions that required more than a nod or shake of the head. Even the cruel kitchen master, who enjoyed tormenting the lower-ranking staff, had eventually lost interest in someone who would not react, would not cry out, would not beg. Silence was Sana's armor. As long as she did not speak, did not draw attention, did not exist loudly in any way, she was safe. She was 23 years old, an Omega in a pack that valued strength above all else, and she had not raised her voice above a whisper in 8 years. Not since the night her parents died. Not since the fire that took her family and her voice in one terrible moment of smoke and screaming. The healers said there was nothing physically wrong with her vocal cords. The damage was psychological, they explained to the pack elders who decided her fate. Trauma-induced mutism. She could speak if she chose to. Her body was capable. But her mind had locked the ability away, buried it beneath layers of fear and grief. The elders had declared her unfit for anything but the lowest service. Omegas were already at the bottom of pack hierarchy, valued mainly for their enhanced senses and their role in calming aggressive wolves. But an Omega who could not speak? Who could not soothe with words or participate in pack discussions? She was assigned to the kitchens, where silence was actually preferred, where she could work with her hands and stay invisible and never have to face the world that had taken everything from her. And for 5 years, that was exactly what she did. Until the night of the Winter Feast, when everything changed. The Winter Feast was the grandest celebration in Winterhold's calendar, held on the longest night of the year to honor the strength of Frostclaw Pack and their Alpha King Halvard. The Great Hall had been transformed for the occasion. Massive fires roared in stone hearths along both walls, their heat barely making a dent in the cold that seeped through the ancient stones. Long tables stretched the length of the hall, laden with roasted meats, fresh bread, winter vegetables, and barrel after barrel of mead and ale. Hundreds of wolves filled the space, pack members, visiting dignitaries from allied territories, nobles and warriors, all dressed in their finest. The noise was overwhelming, a cacophony of laughter and shouting and the clatter of plates and goblets. Sana hated it. She stood against the far wall with the other serving Omegas, holding a pitcher of mead, trying to make herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe braid, her plain gray dress marking her as kitchen staff, her eyes downcast to avoid meeting anyone's gaze. The other servers moved through the crowd with practiced ease, refilling drinks and clearing plates. But Sana stayed frozen against the wall, only moving when specifically summoned, only approaching tables when someone gestured impatiently for more drink. She had perfected the art of being present but invisible, of fulfilling her duties without ever truly being seen. At the head table on the raised dais sat Alpha King Halvard, and despite her best efforts not to look, Sana found her eyes drawn to him repeatedly. He was magnificent, tall and powerfully built, with shoulder-length blonde hair that caught the firelight and eyes the color of ice, pale blue, almost silver. He wore furs and leather befitting his station, and moved with the unconscious grace of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Halvard was beloved by Frostclaw Pack. He had ruled for 12 years, ever since taking the throne at age 28 when his father died in battle. He was strong, just, and fiercely protective of his people. Under his leadership, Winterhold had prospered, and Frostclaw Pack had become one of the most powerful in the Northern Territories. He was everything an Alpha should be. And Sana, invisible Omega that she was, had harbored a silent, hopeless fascination with him for 5 years. Not that it mattered. He had never looked at her, never noticed her existence. To him, she was just another faceless servant if he was aware of her at all. And that was fine. That was safe. Sana did not want to be noticed. The feast progressed with increasing merriment. Halvard rose periodically to make toasts, his deep voice carrying easily across the hall, drawing cheers and howls of approval from his pack. Beside him sat his beta, a grizzled warrior named Tormund, and his head strategist, a sharp-eyed woman named Astrid. Sana refilled goblets mechanically, keeping her head down, counting the hours until she could retreat back to the kitchen and then to her small room in the servants' quarters. And then she smelled it. It was subtle at first, barely detectable beneath the overwhelming sense of roasted meat, wood smoke, and hundreds of wolves in close quarters. But Sana's senses, enhanced like all Omegas but sharpened by years of silent observation, caught it. Something wrong. Something that did not belong. She froze, her pitcher of mead forgotten in her hands, her entire focus narrowing to that one wrong note in the symphony of smells filling the great hall. Sweet, floral, with an underlying bitterness that made her wolf recoil in instinctive warning. Nightshade, mixed with something else she could not quite identify, but the combination was wrong, dangerous, designed to mask the poison beneath pleasant scents. Sana's eyes snapped to the head table, tracking the smell. It was concentrated there, around the Alpha King's seat, around his goblet. Horror crashed through her. Someone had poisoned Halvard's drink. Her gaze darted around the hall, trying to identify the source. A servant moving too quickly away from the head table? A noble with guilty eyes? But there were too many people, too much movement, too much chaos. The poison was already in place, and any moment now, Halvard would drink. Sana's breath came faster. Her hands shook, mead sloshing in the pitcher. She needed to warn someone, needed to tell the guards, the beta, anyone who could stop this. But she could not speak. The familiar paralysis gripped her throat, the weight of 8 years of silence crushing down. She opened her mouth and no sound came out, tried to force words past lips that would not move, vocal cords that had forgotten how to work. Nothing, just terrified, silent gasping. She looked desperately at the other servants, but they were all busy, not looking at her. She tried to catch the eye of a guard, but he was focused on the crowd, watching for physical threats, not poisoning. And at the head table, Alpha King Halvard was reaching for his goblet. No. The words screamed through Sana's mind even as it died in her throat. She watched in horror as his fingers closed around the poisoned cup as he lifted it toward his lips. He was going to drink. He was going to die. And she was going to watch it happen because she could not force herself to speak, could not break through the wall of trauma and fear that kept her silent. Halvard raised the goblet in preparation for another toast. The hall was already quieting, pack members turning their attention to their Alpha King, waiting for his words. He took a breath, ready to speak, ready to drink after his speech. And something in Sana broke. She did not think, did not plan, did not let fear paralyze her. She dropped the pitcher, it shattered on the stone floor, mead spreading in a dark puddle, and ran. The great hall was massive, crowded with hundreds of wolves. But Sana moved through them like water, her small size and Omega instincts letting her slip through gaps, duck under arms, weave between bodies. She ran toward the head table, toward the dais where the Alpha King stood with his poisoned goblet, toward certain punishment for what she was about to do. Guards moved to intercept her. A servant running toward the Alpha King was a threat. But she was small and fast and desperate, and she made it past them. She leaped onto the dais just as Halvard opened his mouth to speak. And Sana, shy, silent, invisible Sana, reached up and clamped her hand over the Alpha King's mouth. The hall went absolutely silent. Every eye turned to stare at the tiny blonde Omega who had just committed what amounted to treason, touching the Alpha King uninvited, interrupting him mid-speech, causing a scene at the most important feast of the year. Halvard's ice-blue eyes went wide with shock. His body tensed, wolf rising to the surface in response to the unexpected contact. Guards rushed forward, hands on weapons. Beta Torment was on his feet, moving to protect his alpha. But Sana kept her hand pressed firmly over Halvard's mouth, even as her whole body shook with terror. Even as tears streamed down her face. Even as her wolf whimpered in submission at the dominant presence she was daring to restrain. She looked up into Halvard's shocked eyes and managed to force out a single word, the first word she had spoken above a whisper in 8 years. Poison. Her voice cracked, barely audible even in the silence. But Halvard heard it. She saw his expression change from shock to sharp attention. Sana's other hand trembled as she pointed to his goblet, still clutched in his hand. Drink, she whispered, each word a monumental effort. Poison. Smell. Wrong. Please. Guards grabbed her arms, trying to pull her away, but Halvard raised his free hand sharply, stopping them. He studied Sana's face, saw the terror there, but also the desperate sincerity. Saw tears streaming down her cheeks and her whole body shaking, but her hand still pressed to his mouth, still trying to protect him. Slowly, carefully, he reached up and gently moved her hand away from his face. His fingers wrapped around her wrist, not restraining, just holding. His touch was surprisingly gentle. You smell poison? His voice was low, meant only for her, despite the hundreds of watching eyes. Sana nodded frantically, unable to force out more words now that the dam had broken. She gestured to the goblet again, then to her nose, trying to communicate what she had detected. Halvard looked at his beta. Tormund, have the goblet tested. Now. Tormund took the cup carefully, and Halvard finally released Sana's wrist. She immediately tried to back away, to flee, but the guards still held her arms. Let her go, Halvard ordered, but do not let her leave the hall. The guards released her but stayed close. Sana stumbled back, wrapping her arms around herself, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She had just touched the Alpha King, had put her hand over his mouth, had interrupted the feast. She was dead. They were going to execute her for this. But Halvard was alive. That was all that mattered. The hall remained in shocked silence as Tormund carried the goblet to one of the pack's healers who had been dining at a table near the dais. The elderly healer took the cup, sniffed it carefully, then dipped a finger in the liquid and touched it cautiously to her tongue. Her face went pale. Nightshade, she said, her voice carrying in the silence. Mixed with blackroot. This dose would have killed within minutes. Agonizing death. No cure. Chaos erupted. Wolves began shouting, demanding to know who had poisoned their Alpha King. Guards moved through the hall, securing exits. Nobles and visitors were suddenly under suspicion, every face a possible traitor. But Halvard's eyes never left Sana. She stood on the dais, so small next to the massive Alpha King, trembling like a leaf in a storm. Her blonde hair had come partially loose from its braid, wisps framing her pale face. Her gray eyes were huge with fear and shock. She had saved his life. This tiny Omega who had never spoken to anyone had risked everything to warn him. Your name, Halvard said quietly, stepping closer to her. Sana's mouth moved, but no sound came out. She tried again, forcing the word past paralyzed vocal cords. Sana. Sana. He said it gently, like it was something precious. How did you know? No one else detected the poison. Smell, she whispered, the word barely audible. Omegas, enhanced. I smelled wrong. And you could not tell the guards? Could not warn anyone else? Shame flooded through Sana. She shook her head, tears starting again. Can't speak, never speak, tried, couldn't. Understanding dawned in Halvard's eyes. You are the silent Omega, from the kitchens. Sana nodded miserably. Of course he had heard of her. The pack probably joked about the broken Omega who could not even perform the most basic function of communication. And yet you spoke today, Halvard said. For me. Before Sana could respond, Tormund approached, his expression grim. "My lord, we have identified who delivered the poisoned goblet. A new servant, hired just for tonight's feast. He has fled, but guards are tracking him." "Find him," Halvard ordered, "and find out who hired him. This was not the work of one wolf." "Yes, my lord." Tormund hesitated. "And the Omega?" Halvard looked at Sana, who had gone even paler at the mention of her fate. "The Omega saved my life. She will be rewarded, not punished." "My lord, she touched you without permission." "She saved my life," Halvard repeated, his voice taking on the alpha command that made every wolf in the hall straighten instinctively. "Anyone who suggests she should be punished for that will answer to me personally." He turned back to Sana, who looked like she might faint. "You will stay in the castle tonight. Tomorrow we will speak more. I want to understand how you detected what no one else could. And I want to know about you, Sana, who never speaks but found her voice to save her Alpha King." Sana tried to curtsy, wobbled, and nearly fell. Halvard caught her elbow, steadying her, and the contact sent a strange jolt through both of them. Something Sana was too overwhelmed to identify, but that made Halvard's eyes narrow thoughtfully. "Take her to a guest room," he told one of the female guards. "Make sure she has everything she needs. And Sana—" He waited until she met his eyes. "Thank you. You gave me a gift beyond measure today. I will not forget it." Sana nodded, still unable to speak now that the crisis had passed. The female guard led her away gently, and the last thing Sana saw before leaving the great hall was Halvard watching her go, his expression unreadable, but his ice-blue eyes intense with something she could not name. Sana spent a sleepless night in a guest room that was far nicer than anything she had ever experienced. The bed was soft, the blankets warm, and there was even a small fire in the hearth. But she could not enjoy any of it. She kept replaying the moment she had touched Halvard, had put her hand over his mouth, had dared to restrain an Alpha King. The audacity of it made her shake all over again. She should have been executed. That was the punishment for touching royalty without permission, for causing a scene, for disrupting pack hierarchy. But Halvard had defended her, had called her actions a gift, had ordered her to stay so he could speak with her again. Sana did not know what to think, did not know what would happen next, did not know if she had made her life better or infinitely worse. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to sunlight streaming through the window and a knock at the door. A servant entered with a tray of food and a message that Alpha King Halvard requested her presence in his private study after she ate. Sana's stomach twisted with nerves, making it impossible to eat more than a few bites. She cleaned herself up as best she could, rebraided her hair, and tried to calm her racing heart. When the guard came to escort her to Halvard's study, she followed on trembling legs. The study was a warm, book-lined room with a large desk and comfortable chairs arranged near a fireplace. Halvard stood by the window, looking out over the snow-covered courtyard, but turned when she entered. "Sana," he said, gesturing to a chair, "please sit." She perched on the very edge of the chair, hands folded in her lap, eyes downcast. Everything in her screamed to make herself small, invisible, non-threatening. Halvard sat across from her, and the silence stretched. Finally he spoke gently. "I am told you have not spoken more than whispers in 5 years, that you work in the kitchens and are known for your silence. Is this true?" Sana nodded. "And yet last night, you not only spoke, but you touched me, an Alpha King, without permission, in front of the entire pack. That must have taken extraordinary courage." She shook her head. Not courage, desperation. But she could not find the words to explain. "Will you tell me why you cannot speak?" Halvard asked. "I do not wish to press if it pains you, but I would like to understand." Sana's hands clenched in her lap. She opened her mouth, tried to force words out, and felt the familiar wall slam down. She shook her head helplessly, tears of frustration welling. "It is all right," Halvard said quickly. "You do not have to explain. I want you to know that what you did last night was remarkable. You saved my life, Sana, and I am deeply grateful." He leaned forward, his ice blue eyes intense. "I also want you to know that I have been thinking about how you detected the poison when no one else did. Omegas have enhanced senses, yes, but even other Omegas in that hall smelled nothing. What makes you different?" Sana struggled with herself, then whispered, "Watch, always watching, listening, smelling, can't talk, so I notice everything else." Understanding flooded Halvard's expression. "You developed your other senses because you lost your voice. You became hyper-aware of your environment because you could not communicate normally." She nodded, relieved he understood. "Sana, I have a proposition for you." Halvard stood and walked to his desk, picking up a document. "Last night proved that there are threats to my life I did not know existed. Someone close enough to my table to poison my drink. Someone I trusted, or at least did not see as a danger." He turned back to her. "I need someone who notices what others miss. Someone whose enhanced senses can detect dangers that normal guards cannot. Someone who—" He paused. "Someone who cares enough about my life to risk their own to save it." Sana's eyes went wide. Was he suggesting what she thought he was suggesting? "I want you to be part of my personal guard," Halvard said. "Not as a warrior, you have not been trained for combat, but as an advisor, someone who attends me, who uses those remarkable senses of yours to watch for threats, to detect poisons or ill intent or danger that others might miss." He smiled slightly. "You would not have to speak if you did not wish to. You could communicate through writing or gestures, or simply pull me away from danger as you did last night. But Sana, I would like you close. I would like to know that the Omega who saved my life is there to do so again if needed." Sana stared at him in shock. He wanted her, silent, broken, invisible her, to be part of his personal guard? To attend the Alpha King himself? It was impossible, unthinkable. Omegas did not serve in positions of importance. They worked in kitchens and laundries and nurseries, never in roles that required trust or authority. "I know what you are thinking," Halvard said, "that this is unprecedented, that the pack will object, that you are just an Omega, and a silent one at that." His voice softened. "But you saved my life, Sana. You proved yourself more valuable than 100 warriors last night. And I trust you in a way I do not trust many wolves." He moved closer, crouching down so he was at her eye level rather than looming over her. "I will not force you. If you wish to return to the kitchens, to your old life, I will not stop you. But I hope you will consider this. I think you have far more to offer than stirring pots and washing dishes." Sana met his eyes, ice blue, sincere, without any trace of mockery or cruelty. He meant it. He actually wanted her at his side. Something warm unfurled in her chest. Something she had not felt in 8 years. Hope. Purpose. The possibility of being more than invisible. She tried to speak, failed, tried again, finally managed a whispered, "Yes." Halvard's smile was brilliant. "Yes?" She nodded more firmly, and this time managed to push out 2 words. "I'll try. That is all I ask." Halvard stood and offered her his hand. "Welcome to my service, Sana. I think this is the beginning of something important." Sana took his hand, the second time she had touched him, and this time by invitation. The warmth of his palm against hers sent that strange jolt through her again, stronger this time, making her wolf stir with interest. She did not understand what it meant. But as Halvard helped her to her feet and explained what her new role would entail, Sana felt something she had not felt in years. She felt seen. The pack's reaction to Sana's new position was mixed at best. Some wolves understood the logic. An Omega with enhanced senses, guarding against threats the Alpha King might not detect, was practical especially after the poisoning attempt. Others saw it as favoritism or weakness, the Alpha King being too soft on a lowly Omega who had gotten lucky. But no one dared challenge Halvard's decision openly. He was Alpha King, and his word was law. Sana moved from the servants' quarters to a small room near Halvard's private chambers. She was given better clothing, though she still dressed simply. And she began the strangest job she could have imagined, attending the Alpha King. She was present during council meetings, sitting quietly in the corner, watching and listening. She accompanied him to meals, standing behind his chair, carefully scenting his food and drink before he consumed it. She followed him through the castle, a silent shadow that most wolves learned to ignore. And slowly, carefully, Sana began to fulfill her role. 3 weeks after the winter feast, she stopped Halvard from signing a treaty with a visiting Alpha, having detected the scent of deception and hostility beneath the other wolf's pleasant facade. Investigation proved the treaty was a trap, designed to give the other pack access to Winterhold's defenses. A month after that, she alerted him to a guard whose loyalty had been compromised, having noticed the subtle signs of nervousness and guilt in the wolf's scent. Again and again, Sana's observations proved valuable. She could not speak much. The words still came slowly, painfully, requiring immense effort. But she learned to communicate through written notes, through gestures, through the expressive looks that Halvard quickly learned to read. And Halvard, for his part, was patient and kind. He never pressured her to speak when she could not. He learned to interpret her silences, to understand what she was trying to communicate even when words failed her. They developed a system, a silent language between them. A touch on his arm meant danger. A particular look meant she needed to write something down. A slight shake of her head during meetings meant she sensed deception. The pack noticed. Whispers spread about the Alpha King and his strange, silent Omega guardian. Some found it touching, the broken Omega finding purpose. Others found it inappropriate, too much closeness between an Alpha and an Omega of no status. But what no one knew, what even Sana and Halvard had not yet acknowledged, was that something deeper was growing between them. It started small. Halvard asking about her day, genuinely interested in her written responses. Sana leaving small gifts in his study. A particularly nice quill she found, wildflowers from the kitchen garden, things that made him smile. Then there were the moments of accidental contact that lingered too long. Halvard's hand steadying her when she stumbled. Sana adjusting his cloak before he went out into the cold. Touches that were not strictly necessary, but that neither of them pulled away from. And the way they looked at each other. Halvard's ice-blue eyes seeking her out in crowded rooms, making sure she was there, safe, close. Sana watching him with an expression that was no longer merely dutiful, but something warmer, softer, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. 3 months after Sana's new role began, Halvard called her to his study late one evening. She entered to find him standing by the fire, his expression troubled. "Sana," he said without preamble, "I need to tell you something. And I need you to be honest with me about what you feel." Alarm shot through her. Had she done something wrong? Was he dismissing her? Halvard must have seen the panic in her eyes because he quickly shook his head. "You have done nothing wrong. You have been—" He paused, searching for words. "You have been extraordinary, more valuable than I could have imagined, more important than I should probably admit." He moved closer, and Sana's heart began to race. "These past 3 months, having you at my side, learning to communicate without words, trusting you with my life day after day, it has been the best 3 months of my reign, and I have realized something." Halvard stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I have realized that the strange feeling I get whenever you are near, the way my wolf becomes calmer and more focused when you are present, the way I find myself seeking your company even when there is no threat to guard against. I understand what it means now." Sana's breath caught. No, he could not mean, "You are my mate," Halvard said softly. I suspected it the night you saved me, when I first touched your hand and felt that jolt of recognition. But I told myself I was imagining it, that the gratitude was confusing me. But Sana, it is not confusion. It is the mate bond. You are mine, and I am yours. Tears flooded Sana's eyes. Joy and terror warred in her chest. He felt it too. The bond was real, but she was an Omega, a broken, silent Omega, and he was the Alpha King. This was impossible. I know what you are thinking, Halvard said, reading her expression with the ease of 3 months' practice, that you are not suitable, that the pack will never accept an Omega Luna, especially one who cannot speak, that I should find someone stronger, more appropriate. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. But I do not want someone else. I want you, your courage, your kindness, your remarkable ability to see what others miss, your silence that is not weakness, but strength, because you have survived what would have broken lesser wolves. Tears spilled down Sana's cheeks. She tried to speak, to tell him all the reasons this could not work, but the words would not come. They never did when emotion overwhelmed her. But Halvard understood. He always understood. You do not have to speak. Just nod yes or shake your head no. Sana, do you feel the bond? Do you know that we are mates? She nodded, tears flowing faster. And knowing that, knowing all the complications it will bring, all the challenges we will face, do you want this? Do you want me? For a long moment, Sana just looked at him, at this man who had been kind when he could have been cruel, patient when he could have been demanding, who had seen value in her when everyone else saw only broken silence. And she realized that this was the voice she had been searching for. Not words, but this. The ability to be understood without speaking, to communicate in the language of looks and touches and shared silences, to be seen and valued for exactly who she was. She nodded. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Halvard's smile was like the sun breaking through winter clouds. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his forehead to hers. Then we will make this work. I do not care what the pack thinks. I do not care about tradition or status or what is appropriate. You are my mate, Sana, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. I love you. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other 3 months. But I love your strength, your compassion, the way you notice everything, the way you communicate volumes without saying a word. And I will wait, however long it takes, for you to be able to say the words back. Years, if necessary. Because having you in my life, even in silence, is worth more than 1,000 declarations from anyone else. Sana tried. She tried so hard to force the words past the barrier in her throat, opened her mouth, pushed with everything she had, fought against 8 years of locked-away voice. The sound was barely there, cracked and rough, but it was there. I love you. 3 words. It took everything she had to speak them, but the look on Halvard's face made it worth the struggle. Say it again, he whispered. Please, I need to hear it one more time. I love you. Slightly stronger this time, though still barely more than a whisper. Halvard kissed her then, gently, reverently, like she was something precious that might break. And the mate bond flared to life between them, that connection finally acknowledged and accepted, locking into place with a rightness that made Sana's wolf sing with joy. When they finally broke apart, Halvard was smiling and Sana was crying and laughing at the same time, overwhelmed by emotion. We will take this slowly, Halvard promised. I will not rush you or pressure you. But Sana, I want everyone to know you are mine. I want to make you Luna of Frostclaw Pack. Will you let me? The old fear tried to rise, the fear of being seen, of being exposed, of taking up space she did not deserve. But Sana pushed it down. She had been silent and invisible for 8 years. She had let trauma dictate her life, had hidden from the world. But she was done hiding. She nodded. Yes. 6 months later, Sana stood before the assembled Frostclaw pack in the great hall of Winterhold Castle, wearing a gown of ice-blue silk that matched Halvard's eyes. The formal Luna ceremony was about to begin, and Sana was terrified. But Halvard stood beside her, his hand clasped firmly in hers, his presence a steady anchor. And scattered throughout the crowd were friendly faces, wolves who had come to value her contributions, who had seen past the silent Omega to the observant, courageous woman beneath. The pack healer, who had become something like a friend. Beta Tormund, who now actively sought Sana's input during council meetings. Even the head cook from the kitchens, beaming with pride at seeing one of her former workers rise so high. Not everyone approved. There were still wolves who thought an Omega Luna was wrong, who whispered that Halvard had been weakened by the mate bond. But they were fewer than Sana had feared, and their protests grew quieter as she proved herself again and again. The ceremony began with traditional words, pack bonds being acknowledged and strengthened. And when it came time for Sana to speak her acceptance, to formally take the role of Luna, every eye in the hall was on her. She had practiced this. Had worked with Halvard for weeks, slowly rebuilding her ability to speak, fighting through the trauma that had locked her voice away. It was still difficult, still required conscious effort, but she was getting better. Sana took a breath, squeezed Halvard's hand for courage, and spoke. I accept. Her voice was quiet but clear, carrying in the silent hall. I will serve Frostclaw Pack. I will stand with Alpha King Halvard. I will protect, guide, and honor this pack with everything I am. The pack howled their approval. Not all of them, but enough. More than enough. And as Halvard pulled her close for the formal kiss that sealed their bond before the pack, as the mate connection pulsed between them with joy and completion, Sana realized something profound. She had spent 8 years believing that silence was safety, that invisibility was survival, that she could only exist on the edges, never taking up space, never being seen. But she had been wrong. Silence was not safety, it was a prison. And the moment she had broken free, the moment she had found her voice to save Halvard's life, she had discovered something more valuable than safety. She had discovered purpose, connection, love. She was still quiet, still soft-spoken, still struggled with words that came easily to others. But she was no longer invisible, no longer voiceless, no longer afraid to exist loudly when it mattered. She was Sana, Luna of Frostclaw Pack, the shy Omega who had saved the Alpha King and found her voice in the process. And she was finally, completely home. Did this story of finding your voice when it matters most touch your heart? Have you ever had to overcome fear, to speak up, to act, to save someone who needed you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories about wolves who defy expectations, mates who see beyond status, and the courage it takes to break free from trauma, hit that subscribe button and join our pack. New tales drop every week, each one celebrating the strength it takes to be vulnerable, to speak when silence feels safer, and to let yourself be seen. Remember, your voice matters, even if it comes in whispers. Stay brave, stay true, and never be afraid to speak up when it counts.